Hello. Welcome to
Hello,
X-Oriente.
everybody.
I'm your host, Eric Diamond,
And I'm your other host, Jason Van Dyke.
and we're going to talk today about defining Enlightenment thinking for the 21st century. This is part of our series on Enlightenment. A lot of interesting stuff's going on now.
Yeah.
Like in terms of kind of bringing this idea of Enlightenment thinking, back into the fore, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a little bit about in the last show. Chris Hodap wrote a really good blog entry. We're going to actually have him on the show at some point soon. I think. Well, you're going away, right? You're going to
I
go
am. I'm
on a
going.
well-deserved vacation.
I'm going on a little bit of a trip to Amsterdam and Paris and London. Be lots of fun.
And I'm going to do the
Back.
same thing in October.
Yay! That's awesome.
Same cities
That's
too.
super fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome.
So you get to go to all the good places and then tell me all about them and which ones I should avoid. Like Vondersex.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you ever see that movie?
No.
Oh, it's
No.
a great movie. It's
No.
called Eurotrip. It's basically like four high school seniors, go on a quest across Europe to chase down one of their the love of their life, who's like a beautiful German pen pal.
Mm-hmm.
It's as dumb as you would think it is, but it's
Excellent.
hilarious. But it's
All right.
I just every time that movie's on, I can't help myself. I have to watch it.
Yeah. The entire time I was in Germany, all I thought of was Beer Fest. So I get that.
And there's a I think Lucy Lawless plays like they get to Amsterdam and
Right.
and they're like, it's Amsterdam, we have to go like find prostitutes,
Right.
like of
Red
course
light
as one
district.
does.
Yeah.
And so they find Lucy Lawless and hilarity ensues. So
Nice.
that was
All right,
and it
good.
was called Vondersex.
Vondersex. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, while you're gone, I'll either fly solo, or maybe what we'll do is see if we can line up a few guest hosts to fill
There you
in.
go.
That would be kind of
All
fun.
right. That would be fun.
Yeah. So we'll see what we could do about that. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to try to get Chris on when you're back,
Yep.
because
That'll be fun. That'll be a really good one.
I think that'll be a really good show. But so there's all kinds of things that are kind of happening kind of in the media and in Masonry, that like the discussion's starting to kind of come up, and this is a good thing. I'm really kind of psyched about this. And so what I wanted to talk about today with you was really kind of about like if we're gonna reconnect to our Enlightenment roots, if that is the source of our social relevance, as it were. First is that, and I know I've asked it on an earlier episode, but is that something A, that we should be doing, and B, if yes, then what does that actually mean in terms of, like we're not going to put on powdered wigs and, be taking snuff and things like that, right. We're not going back to the 18th century.
Yeah.
So what does that mean in the 21st century?
Right. And I think that what's interesting about that question is the answer probably always has to do with Freemasonry, because Freemasonry was such an important part of the Enlightenment, the first Enlightenment, that if this indeed is a second Enlightenment, we should naturally play a big role in that. And what does it look like, to answer your question more directly, is what it looks like to be in our lodges today. It is hopefully a exchange of ideas in a respectful way, where everybody walks away a winner. And it seems simple, but
Well,
not.
and the ideas are not just like ideas, like sort of general platitude, like, but I mean, real, like, things that are actually happening in our world.
Correct.
Right.
Absolutely. And hopefully that's what, your lodge looks like on the inside. Hopefully that's how it operates. And now it doesn't always have to be, a program that your lodge is giving and where everyone's sitting there and, having this formalized discussion. But what it really can be is it can be, some brothers that after lodge gather, and sit and talk. And, the whole purpose of that is to learn something from each other. It's not just to wait your turn to talk. It's to actually, have an exchange and learn something and take something away from that. And hopefully, that's hopefully that's happening in your lodge. And if it's not, there's some work to be done to make it happen.
Well, if it's not too, then that's something that, hopefully, we can help out with.
Right.
And I know that this is something, that some of the other Masonic podcasters, we've had discussions about how do we, enhance Masonic education to sort of encompass some of this stuff. I talked with Brother Hodap for a while last week, and he seems interested and on board with something like that. So, maybe we can make something happen, something cool.
There you go.
So, and then the other thing that was kind of came across my desk this week was something that Chris reported on, which is that the Grand Lodge of, who was it?
I don't know.
It's more recognition craziness, but let's see.
Yeah, it was. Wait, hold on. I'm going to pull this up because, hey, look at that. BBC Scotland air Freemasonry program on Monday night.
Oh, great.
Kick butt.
It was great.
Yeah.
You were great.
Thank you. My 5 minutes of fame.
Yeah, you wear a tuxedo well.
Yeah.
America likes the cut of your jib.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's kind of fun. Kansas suspended recognition of Arkansas and Cuba.
I think they were accusing Arkansas of taking Kansas from them and adding an R in front of it.
Right. It's copyright infringement.
Yeah.
That's great. It was too similar.
People
were getting confused.
Trademark violation.
I'll tell you, well, I know that there's crazy stuff going on in Cuba, and has been for some time now, and really that disagreement and that stuff really in Florida, I know that they're really involved in what's going on in Cuba. So I didn't get a chance to read the follow-up, which this looked much longer than it was when he initially posted it.
I think the beef is that the Grand Lodge of Cuba is chartering lodges in Florida in violation of
that's correct. That's
territorial
absolutely correct.
sovereignty. So
yeah, and they keep getting caught at it because I believe that they had said, "Well, yeah, all right, we did that. We're not going to do it anymore. We're really sorry." And then I think things got better for a very short time, and then they went off and made more lodges. They were like, "We told you not to do that." And they were like, "Oh, that? Yeah, no, we're going to keep doing that."
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So that happened, and then I guess the Grand Lodge of Arkansas is still having lots and lots of problems within its own internal governance, and but as a result, they're basically not allowing specifically Kansas Masons to visit. They're being kind of kicked out of the lodge rooms. Which it's not a very nice thing to do, but
the Grand Lodge of Arkansas is just, I mean, come on, guys.
Well, we hope they can get it resolved. I mean, I don't,
Yeah, and here, if there's a Grand Lodge officer from Arkansas listening to me right now, don't forget this is Dress Up Club for Men. You're taking it too seriously. You guys are just being, come on.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to be about a power struggle.
Right.
If you're power struggling, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's That's my opinion.
And that kind of dovetails into what we're talking about, right? Because it's
It
sort of
absolutely does.
right. It's about how as Masons,
Sure.
we regard, ideas of power and authority, how we regard ideas like, what we take for truth and what we reject, right?
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, our tenets are brotherly love, relief, and truth, and how we arrive at truth, how we arrive at relief, and how we arrive at brotherly love, right, has a huge bearing on how we comport ourselves as a fraternity and how that fraternity is represented to the outside world, right? So Enlightenment thinking for the 21st century. So a lot of this stuff it was as I'm taking from Steven Pinker's really excellent book, which is called Enlightenment Now. And Immanuel Kant, the Enlightenment thinker of the 18th century, he described it as humankind's emergence from its self-incurred immaturity. Right. And his motto was, my Latin is terrible, but sapere aude.
Which is actually the motto of the Colonial Lodge, number 1821.
See, there you go. Which means?
Dare to know.
Dare to know. Dare to know. And that's tell me about that. Like, what does that mean? Like, why dare to know? Why do we have to dare to know?
You know what? I'm going to pull this up. Grandmaster of DC gave a speech on Friday night, and
it seems like a challenge.
Speech,
right? I dare you.
Right. Well, sure. What I'm going to pull up though is I want to read you what the Grandmaster said, because this speech really it hit me on this. So why no? Okay. And I think, and it actually talks about why one should seek knowledge and why one should dare to find that knowledge. Let me see here. Let's see if I can open it from home. That'll be fun. Looks like we made it. All right. It's opening. He gave this speech to, it was the York Rite Convention, I believe is what it's called, where they elect their grand officers, etc. And I apologize. I should have been prepared for this. There we go. All right. And essentially, this is what he said. Thank you for honoring me with the opportunity to speak to you this evening. Honor. Did you catch that? Let's talk about that for a second. It's kind of a heady concept, isn't it? Honor, the kind of thing one would expect Freemasons to talk about, especially here in the York Rite. And I've been thinking about it a little bit. What does it look like when we see a truly honorable man? How do we know what that is? Honor can be the practice of charity and benevolence by those strong enough to not have to worry about things like being either charitable or benevolent. I think about the fabled knights of medieval times who were skilled and deadly warriors, yet they lived by the code of chivalry that demanded that they live to the highest moral and social standards, rather than be bullies and dictators with no regard for the weak. I think this is the honor that our Knights Templar are the most familiar with. But in this way, an honorable man is a powerful man that sees little utility in using that power without great forethought, and even then, only in the defense of others, and never for personal gain. But for us, I think it's much more than just that. Honor is humbling oneself to others and their generosity. You might be the most important man in the room, but it is honorable to treat everyone else like they are the most important person in the room. So the honorable man will always go last because he sees that everyone else is more important than he is. And he's deeply grateful for any gifts that are given to him, regardless of their intrinsic value. He understands the old adage, it's the thought that counts, is not only 100% true, it's the only thing that counts. Honor is also the calm and restraining rationality that is taught to us as Freemasons in the symbol of the compasses, one of the great lights which we use to circumscribe our passions and keep them in due bounds. The ancient Greeks and Romans called this philosophy Stoicism. They both teach us that an honorable man never reacts off the cuff or from a gut feeling because he doesn't have to. He has the experience and the wisdom that teach him that he should never be too happy nor too sad, and that his actions should always be deliberate and well-reasoned. Lastly, honor is respectful and quiet. The honorable man listens instead of talks. He empathizes with the moods and opinions of others, and he sees things from their viewpoints when in conversation. He respects a diversity of opinion, race, religion, political views, or sexual orientation. Because no matter the viewpoint, the honorable man knows that he can always learn from those around him. But simply knowing and accumulating knowledge is not enough for an honorable man. Here's the key. Understanding will always be the goal for the honorable man, whether that's understanding the people around him or looking deep inside and having an honest understanding of himself and his own limits. So that was a little bit of what he said. And I think right there, that last part, I think is really the most important part about what honor really is and about what knowing means. Because knowing is easy. But what I think Kant talks about, and I think what the motto sapere aude really means is it's not just knowing, it's understanding. You're right. The key is the word dare, right? It's a challenge. It's an interesting word to use there, and it really means that one shouldn't just have a surface level knowledge of something, but should really understand it, dare to know it. And I think that's kind of what the Grandmaster was getting at there.
Yeah. And we, years ago in one of the earlier episodes, I talked more about the sort of the difference between knowing and believing, right? So I think that there's in dare to know, it's like go beyond your belief, go beyond your preconceptions, to go beyond your dogmas to really find out, as uncomfortable as that truth might be. Right. And so that to me is dare. So Pinker argues that there's four kind of themes that kind of define Enlightenment thinking. One is reason, two is science, three is humanism, and four is progress. And so I kind of wanted to kind of briefly touch on those, and then if you've got any color to add, just jump in, okay?
Go ahead.
All right. So reason is when you hold your beliefs to an objective standard, right? Now, I actually, years ago, right after I graduated from grad school, I did this project for Yahoo. And one of the things that we were trying to define was, what is a rational experience? Like, what does it mean to be rational? And here's how I defined it. And it wasn't just me, it was my whole team. We really slaved over this. But a rational experience is one that is grounded to rules or criteria, based in fact, can be interpreted or evaluated, and if repeated, should yield the same outcome. Right? So facts, what are facts? Facts are things that come out from outside your own perception. Right? And, the reason that repetition is important is that, successful repetition is an indicator of,
easy for you to say.
I know, reliability, right?
Yeah, sure.
So that's how
Absolutely.
you know when an idea is reliable, is when you can, when it works over and over again. And then, interpreted or evaluated as part of that really means it's sort of about the act of comparing two or more things and making judgments about them. Right. So that's sort of, so reason really is when you hold your beliefs to an objective standard. And when we do that, we can all agree on what's true when we subject it to, rational thought. So that means that what we don't rely on to, for objective truth, right? That's a difference. That's different from subjective truth, right? What's true for me or what I believe is different than what's true for everybody, right? Faith, dogma, revelation, authority, charisma, mysticism, divination, visions, gut feelings, or hermeneutics. And probably the most important of this is common sense, right? The idea of common sense gets us into so much trouble in our society. And what's really funny is that, like, it's common, it's common sense. That's, we like to think that common sense is obvious, but if we use common sense as our standard of truth, we might still believe like that the earth is flat.
Sure. Absolutely. Right? Or that bathing will get you sick.
Right. Or that bathing will get you sick, or that you'll catch a cold from being cold. Right.
There you go.
Or that, or even like even more insidious things like, for example, we see that, like a lot of like racial, like ideas that result in racial discrimination and sexual discrimination come out of this idea of common sense. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. So let's not, let's be very careful when someone uses, well, it's just common sense to argue something. Right. That doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything. Right.
And generally when they're saying that, it's saying, and you're an idiot. How did you not figure this out yourself?
Well, yeah, there's that. Right. And then there's also, I don't need evidence to support my claim because it's common sense. Right. Everybody knows it. It's obvious. It's self-evident.
That's right. That's right.
And let's not confuse the endorsement of reason with the idea that man is a rational creature, right? We're not rational. Lord knows I work in advertising. We are not rational people.
No, we're definitely not.
No, but we are capable of reason. It's just hard for us. And typically the less educated we are, the harder it is, right?
Mm-hmm. And we have to practice it.
Yeah. And so as men of enlightenment, we cling to reason precisely because we know that we're irrational. And that we have those tendencies. And so that is this idea of daring to know, right? That's the struggle,
right?
That we, that's why we work in the quarries. We don't play in the quarries, right? It's work.
Absolutely. And part of that work is confronting the truth of something. That dare to know really actually talks about the dare there is you may think one way, but dare to be wrong, and confront the fact that you're wrong, and move on.
Well, which leads us to the next of the four, right, is science, right? Mm-hmm. Science is a method that is based on itself four ideas, right? The first is skepticism, right?
Right.
That we don't accept anything at face value until there's evidence to support it. So even the most obvious things, even things that, like everybody knows because it's common sense, right, deserves the same scrutiny as something that we've just discovered or just learned, right?
Sure.
Because we need to like challenge our assumptions. Fallibilism, right, which is the idea that we might be wrong and that in the spirit of inquiry, there's no sin in being wrong. Right. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's, I mean, that is hard for Masons, especially for guys who are like, by the time you get up to a grand, it's hard for human beings, right? But it's harder still for Masons, especially, when you're up there, when you're a past master on the sidelines, or you're, or you're the Grand Master, right? You think that, you can do no wrong because you have all this experience, right?
Right.
The third thing is open debate, right? That free and open debate to let the best idea win. And that's, of course, subject to rational thinking, critical thinking.
Right.
And finally, and this is a kind of an interesting one because, like, remember that guy, we talked about it a little bit, that Google engineer who he sort of posited this question on a company board about, are women just naturally right?
Yeah, right.
And Google was like, nope, and he said, well, that's not free and open debate.
Yeah. Right.
But
Correct.
there's free and open debate, and then there's free and open debate. And that's, like, if you're not willing to debate based on generally accepted facts that are empirical. For example, when you have a debate between a guy like Bill Nye and who is that guy who runs the Creationism Museum, right?
Yeah, right.
You can't. That's not a debate. That's not.
No.
Yeah, that's not free and open debate. And and that's something that people who are very into dogma, they love to try to use that against people who are scientific as a way of saying, well, you're quashing free and no. We're based in data. If you've got data, we'll have a debate about it. Until you have data, if all of the data that you have is waving a Bible, that's not enough, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then finally, the fourth thing in science is empirical testing, right? We gather evidence a controlled way, and we're able to repeat the tests reliably. And this is super important. I remember back in the 80s, there was that these two guys who published some paper. They're like, we discovered cold fusion, right?
Right.
And
that happened. That happened every couple months or so. Yeah.
Yeah. Like these two guys figured out how to get fusion in a test tube. Only problem was no one could reproduce the results. Nobody. Like all these scientists tried. Nobody could reproduce it, so they had to throw it away. And Elizabeth Holmes, she was the CEO of Theranos. Supposedly had this this sort of genetic blood test that she was able to do that was the bee's knees.
It was portable. It was portable. And it was with a couple drops of blood, it could run a full genetic spectrum, and it was almost instantaneous. I mean, it even talking about it, I mean, like it
sounded too good to be true.
It's too good to be true, and turns out it was. And she got she's going to get, I think, 7 years in prison for fraud.
Yeah,
and millions of dollars she's going to have to repay investors. And it's not. The crazy thing is that, here we are using our common sense, correct, and said that's ridiculous. That could never happen. The technology isn't such that we could ever make that work. And yet she sold really major investors, very, very smart people. And she ran Theranos as a company that was valued in the billions. And it turned out, oops.
Yeah. Oops. Yeah.
We faked all the data.
Yeah.
So
you
got to be careful with that stuff.
Got to be very careful. And here's a tip. Here's an enlightenment tip for all you folks out there. Watch out when someone says clinically proven, right? Clinically proven. That doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean peer reviewed. That doesn't mean published in a scientific journal. What that means is that we found a group of people that we were able to sort of give this vitamin or this, penis growing supplement or whatever it is, right, to them. And they came back and said, hey, it's great. That's clinically they're allowed to say clinically proven, right? Sure. But you have to go and look at what was the methodology. Is it repeatable? Right. And
that's absolutely right. And
almost always when a group of a vitamin company or a supplement company says it's clinically proven, you have to look for that data that's repeatable. And if it's not there, right, they'll say, oh, we tested this weight loss drug on 18 people and, all of them lost an average of 2 pounds. That's not science, right? That's just.
Right. And remember that, in the 1800s, there was previous to our founding of the Food and Drug Administration, everything was a quack medicine.
Yeah.
And it was all just smoke and mirrors to make you feel better. Many of the supplements that they sold, back in the 1800s before regulation through the Food and Drug Administration were laced with cocaine. Because, hey, go figure, turns out cocaine makes you feel freaking great. It gives you a jolt of energy.
It's the pause that refreshes, right?
Absolutely. And so, wouldn't you know it, they would sell it in some serum or in some bottle of Coca-Cola, perhaps. And people would drink it and go, "Oh my God, my leg doesn't hurt anymore." When I drink this, I feel great.
Right? Or they put laudanum. They put laudanum in the snake oil, and then it would be like,
Absolutely.
I feel nothing.
Right.
I feel no pain.
That's exactly right.
I'm addicted.
It's incredible what full hop opium will do for you. And that's really interesting. And the thing is that that's a reaction. The FDA is a reaction to all that stuff, where they said, listen, we need to have standards. We have to be able to identify a cause and an effect before you're allowed to go out and make claims about these things.
Right.
It's really interesting. And what's interesting that is a direct that's a direct descendant of Enlightenment ideals.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. The third element of Enlightenment thinking is the idea of humanism, which is the philosophical and ethical stance that emphasizes the value and agency of human beings. So in other words, when we say agency, what we mean is the ability of people to make their own choices, the ability of people to control their own lives without those decisions being made for them, both individually and collectively, and generally prefers critical thinking, right, as we've talked about, and evidence of acceptance prefers critical thinking and evidence of acceptance of dogma or superstition. So, critical thinking trumps, pardon the pun, dogma and superstition.
Right. Absolutely.
And the key here is that humanism doesn't take the stand for some humans, but all humans, right? All mankind.
Right.
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 And this is what the colonists meant when they wrote, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed with their creator certain inalienable rights, and among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Right.
Sure.
Basically, they said everybody's got these rights, and they're inalienable. You cannot take them away. Right. So what it doesn't say is white Christians. What it doesn't say is English speaking people. What it doesn't say is citizens, right? Landowners, right? It doesn't, educated people. It says all people, right? And that's sort of the essence of humanism. Another important idea of humanism is that individuals are sentient, not groups, right? So humanism values the agency of people over the agency of institutions. And this is especially relevant today because now, we have this trend where corporations are assuming more and more rights that they never had. So the idea of a corporation started, back in the 18th century, it was pretty rare to be granted a charter for a corporation. And it was really a mechanism. Basically what a corporation is, for those who don't know, is it's like a fictitious person who enjoys certain kinds of rights in terms of being able to enter into contracts with other people, right? And so the whole idea of the corporation was that if the corporation, at that time, if a person went into debt, you hold that person responsible. And in fact, that person could be thrown into debtor's prison, right? Or sent to the workhouse, right? Which went in England well into the 19th century. But a corporation, no individual would be liable for the failure of the corporation. Today, corporations have freedom of speech. Corporations have freedom of religion. The thing is that corporations don't bleed. Corporations, corporations, they don't think, right? They're run by people. So it's a kind of disturbing thing in our society that corporations are assuming the benefits of these sort of universal, humanistic rights, these inalienable rights, with none of the responsibilities.
Correct.
Right. And so there's a really interesting theory posed by some sociologists and economists that a corporation is by nature a sociopathic organization because they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders, but not to the society at large. Right.
It's one of their few responsibilities.
Right. And that's a a recent thing, right? It used to be that like in order to get a charter, you had to demonstrate that your corporation was in some way related to the public good.
Yep.
That there was a need for, like a public need to have this ability to do this because you were doing something good for people, like, you know, importing tea or,
Sure.
you know, getting people out west or, you know, whatever.
Absolutely. Right.
And so, you know, one of the reasons that we're able to do this is because humans are endowed with the ability to have sympathy.
Right.
Which corporations?
And empathy.
Empathy.
Correct.
Right? Which corporations don't have. I mean,
Yeah.
the people in them do, right? Maybe
Sure.
they can be
Sure.
influenced, but by themselves, they don't.
No. And there's no consequence if they don't.
Right. Right. So the other aspect of humanism is that humanism is cosmopolitan, which means that it does not recognize borders or, you know, religion or ethnicity. And this is a key point of Masonry, right? Masonry is cosmopolitan. And it makes me uncomfortable. I mean, here's the thing. I'm a patriotic guy. I love America. I love the country. You know, I was born in America and I love the idea of America. But where Masonry is concerned, they're not equivalent. Right? Like when you get up and start singing the Star Spangled Banner and expect everybody to sing it and everybody to stand up, there may be people who are not citizens of the United States. There may be people who are guests, right? And they're completely entitled, right, not to pledge allegiance to our flag because they're not citizens of our country, right? So
Right.
we do things sometimes in Masonry that run counter to this idea, and we've somehow, you know, a lot of it I think is because for a lot of people, like they only know, you know, Masons that are American. And so they figure, well, you know, Masonry is, so there's a disturbing tendency to sort of turn Masonry into a, I don't know, like a patriotic society or a military booster club. And that
Club of jingoistic people.
Well, they can be jingoistic, or it could just be like, you know, the purpose of Masonry is to sort of honor our vets and things like that. Look,
right.
Honor your vets. I'm honor our vets. Like I'm all for it. It's just not Masonry. That's not what Masonry is there for. It's like politics. It's like we could do that outside of Masonry.
Right.
So humanistic, humanism stands against slavery, despotism, harsh punishment for frivolous offenses, and torture, right? So that's kind of an absolute, right? You can't call yourself a humanist and be for torture, right? Even if there's a greater good, you know, so like the controversy over waterboarding and things like that, you know, there might be a greater good in getting, you know, using torture to get somebody to confess, right?
Sure.
But it's still wrong. It's still,
Right.
you know, because it goes against the principles of humanism. And those practices, right? Slavery, despotism, harsh punishment, and torture, those were very common, right? In
Absolutely.
you know, before the Age of Enlightenment, right? The Age of Enlightenment was really what got, you know, like the idea of humanistic treatment or the idea of capital punishment only for the most heinous of offenses. And Pinker points out something interesting when he talks about this. He says, you know, what's interesting is that the reason that the punishment fits the crime is not out of some sort of sense of cosmic justice. It's to keep like the punishment for small offenses small so that you don't escalate them to large offenses.
Yeah.
Right. So if by here's a perfect example. Like, so you have the legend of Robin Hood, right?
Yeah.
Right. So Robin Hood kills a deer to feed himself and is now an outlaw. And the punishment for killing for killing a deer is death.
Right.
So now he's already a marked man. He's already under a death sentence.
He has nothing to lose.
Right. Why not go all in? Let's start robbing people. Let's start killing people. Right. Why not? You know, it's Now,
Same punishment.
same punishment. They're going to kill me anyway,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the idea of like why you scale punishment like that is it's a purely practical thing.
Right.
And so the final one is progress, and this one is kind of difficult, I think, especially for people who consider themselves to be conservative. Because people think that progress means progressive, or people think that progress means, that we're building some kind of utopia or something like that. It's really not.
Right.
That's not what progress means in the Enlightenment context. What progress means is it's a gradual improvement of the conditions of life.
Right.
Right. It's the advancement of medicine. It's it's technology. In fact, capitalism is a form of progress, right?
Absolutely.
And it's interesting. I was talking with a good friend of mine he's an economics professor at my old business school. I gave a guest lecture there last weekend, and we were talking. The subject came up of universal income, and he's kind of conservative. He's very against the idea of universal income, and Karl Marx wrote a paper, which I think we talked a little bit about, called The Fragment on Machines, where he sort of asks, like, what happens when the machines can make themselves? Like, what happens to work at that point? And so what he says, what Marx says is that, work will cease to exist, and then everybody will just live a life of leisure, right? What he didn't sort of understand at that point was that the problem is that if people own the means of production, if people own the machines, because machines can be owned, right, then that's probably not going to happen, right? Like, you're not going to just get things for free, right?
Right.
So there's this idea of, some people are calling it a negative income tax, right? Where you if you make under a certain amount of money, the government pays you, or a universal income or something like that. And he said that's the wrong approach. He said the right approach is to get the technology to the point where it's so cheap to live, right?
Yeah.
And Pinker kind of talks about this in his book. He says, the price of, a gallon of milk, for example, has been steadily dropping for the last 100 years, right? And the quality is going up, right? So we're able to live a lot better for a lot less resources. And it's not just money, right? You can't just look at it in terms of, you have to look at it in terms of like, what does a month's wages buy you, right? What is what the resources that you're expending on feeding yourself? If you think about like how much time a woman had to spend in the 19th century just putting food on the table, right? Like she couldn't work. She couldn't work outside the house. I mean, maybe she had to, but like you had to spend so much time just in the essentials of life, carrying water, right?
Exactly.
Right. Just cleaning clothes, just things like that. And over the years, progress has made it so that those things are cheaper and faster to the point where we barely think about them anymore.
Right.
Right. So, and that's sort of the idea that's sort of the thing that my friend, the professor Arjun, talked about. He talked about this idea of efficient markets. Like he says, well, efficient markets are the best way to like move progress forward. And so what we don't always figure out is that in order to keep the market efficient, we have to sort of be very careful about who we allow to have a monopoly, right? Because businesses,
absolutely.
Right? In competing, they want to have, you want to have a monopoly. You want to get rid of your competition.
That's right.
But
Correct.
if you're able to monopolize a certain kind of resource, then the incentive to progress is not there anymore. Right? Your incentive is to keep anybody from introducing anything that might threaten you.
Right. An efficient marketplace is different than an efficient business.
Yes. Yes.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because an efficient business always is seeking a monopoly, because that is a business at its most efficient.
Right.
but that's not the best for the market. The
Exactly.
marketplace is the most efficient when the businesses are competing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting.
So those are the 4 elements that make up Enlightenment thinking. So now I want you to talk. Let's talk about this as it relates to Freemasonry. Like, is this something that, I mean, a lot of Masons don't think like this.
Well,
A lot of us
and
don't.
I think you're right, and I think that I think there are fewer and fewer lodges that do this, that really examine their roots. And when I say not like their roots, I mean the roots of Freemasonry. Where does it come from? Why does it exist? What purpose did it serve before? Um, and that's starting to come to the forefront as our membership numbers decline.
Mm-hmm.
One of the benefits of having this declining membership that we have is that it forces us to ask tough questions about ourselves, and it forces us to go back and look at our history and say, all right, well then how did we develop? How did we get to the point, where things were honky dory and now they're sliding backwards? And I think more and more Grand Lodges and lodges in general are coming to the realization that it's these Enlightenment values, that it's this search for progress, right? And that's what was happening in these lodges, and that's what made them attractive to good men, and the practice of these Enlightenment ideals is what made them better. And so, uh, as we kind of develop that, as people start to make this realization, I really think that it's starting to go back to that. Now, the tough part is that lodges have to really learn how to do this and how to practice this in their lodges. How do you have a debate in lodge about a topic that definitely is controversial? Otherwise, why have a debate about it? But that could be sensitive to your members. How do you do that in a respectful way?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you do that in a respectful way that when the debate is over, you may not have changed minds, but everybody walks away with a better understanding of where their brothers think and feel. And so, and what's interesting about that is that there isn't a winner or a loser there. And I think as Americans, our culture teaches us there are winners and there are losers. We're bad at teaching people. Well, sometimes there's a gray area where, nobody won, nobody lost, but we all walked away better. And it was a win-win for everyone. We're terrible at teaching that to people because
Mm-hmm.
it's a really difficult thing to teach, and it's a really difficult thing to practice. And unfortunately, it's one of those things that you just have to, you have to do it to be better at it. Malcolm Gladwell is famous for the 10,000 tries at something, right? Or 30,000. What is it? Is it 10 or 30,000? You've got to do something, an action. I think it's 30,000 times in order to master it.
Mm-hmm.
And and he always uses the example of going to the driving range, right? You learn how to drive a golf ball by doing it over and over and over and over again. And part of that is to teach muscle memory. And over the course of 30,000 tries of that, you become very, very good at it. And it's that repetition. It's correcting small mistakes, and that goes directly to what you're talking about. Is that progress, right? You're making progress towards something, and in a lodge context, that means that your first debate, your first discussion, is going to be clumsy and terrible. People might walk away with hurt feelings, but that's okay. You learn from that and you try and make it better the next time. what were our pitfalls last time? Well, we slid into this argument and we just shouted at each other, well, all right, then how do we avoid that next time? And you move yourself and you keep doing it until you're really good at it. And the thing is that once you have a few people in a lodge that are really good at it, as you start adding more members to your lodge, those members learn from you. They see your actions, and they don't necessarily have to go through the pitfalls that you went through in the beginning. And so I think that's how you translate this stuff. And I think it's really, really important that lodges start doing these things. Because that is what Freemasonry is supposed to be.
So I guess we're in agreement that this is something that we should be pursuing as a movement.
Absolutely.
Within Masonry.
Mm-hmm. It's a rediscovering of our roots.
Yeah, I think so. And here's what's kind of interesting. The Enlightenment at the time in the 18th century kind of defined what a gentleman was.
Sure, absolutely, right? It did.
I mean, that's how you knew.
Sort of, Eric. I kind of disagree with that. I think that the Enlightenment. I think it started to level the playing field. The Enlightenment coincides with the development of a middle class. Previous to the 1600s, I should say that. Probably previous to the 1500s, there was very rich and super poor, and most people were super poor, and almost owned by the rich in a lot of ways. And of course, I'm speaking of just European culture,
right?
And then in mid 1500s into the 1600s, rich people back then, it was disgusting. It was below them to think of money. But then all of a sudden, people started to say, wow, well, there's a market inefficiency. They identified that rich people didn't care about being rich, technically. And so what they did is that you see this class rise that are like the managers and the money people. And in Amsterdam, it really took shape in Amsterdam. And a lot of times it was the Jewish community that would say, like, hey, we're not below the money thing. We'll take that over for you. If you don't want to sell yourself with it, right? You don't want to sell yourself for it. I'll do it. And they became very wealthy. And then what happens is that wealth translates to power, because now, when a rich person said, hey, I want to buy I'm going to build a new castle, someone would say, yeah, great. How are you going to pay for that? Where are you going to get the rocks? Where are you going to get the masons? Who's going to come in and do that for you? Mm-hmm. I don't worry about money. We just do that because, I'm a duke. And they go, yeah, it doesn't matter. And then that started to really matter. And so you see this middle class start to evolve where, you could make something of yourself. And that's when this middle class has Freemasonry. They start talking about this Enlightenment stuff because it's fashionable at the time to talk these things. But what they really were trying to do is they were trying to mimic the upper class. This is their entrance into it. And what Masonry taught them was how to dress right. How do you dress for dinner? What are your manners at dinner? What does it mean to be a gentleman? Mm-hmm. And why does one want to be a gentleman? And it's really interesting. It is the middle class very much trying to be the upper class. This is kind of their stepping ladder through that. And in a lot of ways, I think that Masonry still is that today. Mm-hmm. It is, I don't care that you're a plumber or even an IT professional who, wears a sweatsuit to work during the day. When you come to a Masonic event, when you come to lodge, you will wear a suit and tie. It's not good enough to wear a jacket and tie wear a
Mhm.
suit and tie. How do you tie your tie? That's important. It's those little details that teach you how to comport yourself as a gentleman.
Hmm.
A gentleman. I'm sorry, but in my view, you can look at people like what's his name from Facebook? Who am I thinking of? And I can't do it, and
Oh,
it's terrible.
Zuckerberg, Mark
Yeah,
Zuckerberg.
Zuckerberg, not a gentleman, absolutely not.
Hmm.
Doesn't comport himself as one. There's a certain restraint to being a gentleman, and people like Zuckerberg have none. They don't have restraint. They
Hmm.
don't understand that. They think that because they're smarter, because they've reached a certain level of success, that they no longer have that the rules no longer apply to them. That they're able to break those rules. And then it's a whole culture in Silicon Valley. We're here to disrupt.
Well, so here. So let me jump in here. So I think that you bring up an interesting point, but I think I think it's about comportment, right? It's about how you behave. And that was sort of
Correct.
right. So in other words, if you as so after the 18th century, right, the domain of what made someone gentle, right, was breeding, right? You inherited your dukedom or whatever.
Right.
And that was bestowed by the king, who got his power from God, and stuff like that. Well, the Enlightenment rolls around, and all of a sudden those ideas are starting to break down, right? Because as you said, the economic, the economics are changing, so that there's more wealth coming from more places, and what
Right.
used to be considered the source of wealth, which was land, right, was
Right.
no longer
Mhm.
the be all and end all, right? So there were
Mhm.
other ways to create wealth, and in fact, a lot of these guys did buy their way into the aristocracy, right?
Mhm.
But it was how one comported oneself that defined, at least on paper, right? Defined
Mhm.
how whether you were a gentleman or not. So a blackguard, right, was somebody who
Mhm.
supposedly would have good breeding, but would behave
Mhm.
in a way that was not consistent with being a gentleman. And I think
Mhm.
that it was sort of the Enlightenment restraint that that was the hallmark, I think, of this idea, even to the point where you had guys like Charles II, and he
Mhm.
sort of ushered in this whole idea of like
Absolutely.
the enlightened despot, right? The
Correct.
enlightened,
Right. Right. He started the Royal Society.
right,
Pretty good.
right.
Yeah. But but I think that what's interesting is that the culture, especially in American business today, which is that of disruption. Um, it's about breaking the old, and bringing in new ways of thinking. Is in one way very much about like the Enlightenment, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's saying, listen, we've got no problem with examining the old ways of doing things, and and applying the test of the new. And if the new wins, you go with the new.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that being said, it it also isn't. You know, it is it is unrefined in many ways, because it seeks a shortcut where there shouldn't be one, and tends to um, it tends to ignore the consequences of their progress, right? It just bounds forth regardless,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not how the Enlightenment worked. Progress was a incremental thing. It was never meant to go, 100 miles an hour. We weren't supposed to skip steps. And today we're so impatient that that's exactly what we do. We skip the steps. We don't take the incremental progress. We hit for the fences. We want the home run, regardless if the home run ball, bounds into the audience and causes a chain reaction that kills 5 people. Well, it was a home run, right? You know.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. And this is kind of like ripped from the headlines, right? But just today, the New York Times is reporting that Cambridge Analytica, right, which is the data firm that the Trump campaign used to, to sort of market its messages on social media, actually kind of. So what they did was, and it's funny, like I fell for this. I know tons of Masons did, but last year, like every not in 2016, all those quizzes that were going around Facebook, what Star Wars character are you, right?
Right.
That what they're doing is they're collecting your data, right? They get you give them permission to go into your Facebook thing, and they can see everything. They can see what you like, what you follow, who you interact with, and stuff like that. And Facebook is they're very strict with what they allow you to use and what they allow you not to use. So they're really strict. I know this because I work with those guys, and they're very conscientious about this. But, Cambridge Analytica was able to basically scrape this data out of Facebook and get it out of the platform and use it in their own way, right? Which was to market essentially, fake news and ginned up stuff, both to people who are conservative and people who are liberal. And now Facebook is like starting to come to terms with this, right? Like this is happening right now. And it's interesting that you mentioned Zuckerberg as a gentleman, because I know from people who know, this is like when he started this was not, he did not start that, and it's funny, like
exactly.
You talk to these guys, the Google founders or Steve Jobs. Right. None of these guys set out to make billions and billions of dollars. They were trying to make the world a better place. I mean, Google was trying to find a better way to search for stuff on the internet. That's really what they were. They had, remember, this is the company that was like, we're going to digitize all books so people can get knowledge,
right.
They were,
yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And all of a sudden, like now Facebook is in this really, really difficult spot where their platform is being used to subvert democracy. Their platform,
unintended consequences,
right? And so this is going to be a real test of enlightenment. And I know, now Zuckerberg is faced with this horrible dilemma. He knows right and wrong. He knows what's right. Does he do what's right, or does he follow his fiduciary responsibility? And that's going to be the really tough thing.
It is.
Right? It's going to be really tough. And the thing that all these companies are really freaking out over. So there's this thing in Europe called the GDPR, which is it's a set of very strict privacy and security laws that are being that go into effect in Europe in May. And the thing is like, if you're Facebook, you can't afford to have like one set of rules for one country and one set of rules for another country and one set of rules. You can't do business like that, right?
Nope.
So they're going to have to comply with this, and it's going to change a lot about how we look at tech. And so it's going to be really interesting to see like how is Facebook going to respond to this? And it's a really, really, really tough situation, and it's based on size, and it kind of boils down to that adage, and I can't remember who said this, but they said power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. When Facebook started, it was a small thing. It was a really noble idea. We want to connect people.
Absolutely.
Right? And now it's this monster, and like, it's almost like you can do no right, So I think, bringing this back to the Enlightenment, I think that the Enlightenment basically says is like, now we have to sort of detach ourselves. Right.
Right.
And and look
search
at
for
this
honest answers.
and look and go through, look
Mm-hmm.
at reason and science and humanism and
And
progress.
if one right, and if someone could benefit from Sapare Aude, Zuckerberg.
Absolutely. Right. And so then the question is this, okay, now like what's going to win? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Is money going to win, or is what's right going to win? Is morality?
Where's morality?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's a really what an interesting time to be alive. Right.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
and more than that, what an interesting time to be a Freemason. Right.
Exactly. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Okay. So I guess we've answered the question, is it too late for Masonry? And you're saying absolutely not.
No, definitely not.
Let's just sort of end out the hour by saying, I want to pose the question. So what do we need to do? What needs to be different about how we operate, how we educate, how we regard the fraternity in order to start to move this thing that has evolved, over the centuries back to this place where we're actually not just doing good things for ourselves and making us better men as individuals, but making humanity better.
Mm-hmm.
What do we need to do? What's the prescription?
It's a tough question, and it is the $1 million question. But I think the answer there it lies inside of the values that we talked about through that the Enlightenment values, and it's that the first step is to make an honest assessment. Who are we? Where are we? What are we now? Once you've made that honest assessment, then you can say, all right, going forward, this is what we want to be, and here are the incremental steps to get there. I think that's a really, really oversimplistic answer to an incredibly complex question.
But I think it's one we have to tackle it.
Absolutely. And it's something that we have to start thinking about now. For sure.
All right. Well, we'll wrap this up.
Yeah.
And we'll keep continuing.
We'll keep on it.
I think this whole year is going to be on.
I agree.
How do we do this? I think that this is something. So, is there anything on social media? Anything in the comments? I can't see them for some reason.
I can't see that we're live on social media, to be honest.
Oh, that's so weird.
Yeah. Let's see. Hold on. Let's pop in and see what's going on. No.
I know we're live because I can see the bits going by.
What?
I just don't know where we're going. We might be going to the wrong location. That would be.
But could be. I am looking at our page right now and see no evidence of our liveness.
Technology, you gotta love it.
It's the best. It's the best. Well, there you have it.
Okay. Well, we'll at least it'll go up.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
There was something else that I came across. I just wanted to kind of mention.
Sure.
Have you heard about the Golden Rule marble?
No.
Okay, so I was invited to become to join the Facebook group, the Facebook group for Masons in Texas, and there are a bunch of these guys who have this thing called the Golden Rule marble, and it's a marble that it's a marble about, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch in diameter, and it's got a bronze band around the equator with the Golden Rule inscribed on it: do unto others. And so these guys were just sort of like, well, let me show you mine. It's kind of an interesting story. So it turns out that the guy who started the Samsonite company 100 years ago, because Samsonite was a big innovator in plastics. So they made these plastic marbles and embedded these like bronze, like they would have this, like they kind of glue them together. and he would give them out as gifts to people. It's like
Sure.
little corporate giveaways, and you can still find them on eBay. They run about, I don't know, between 20 and $40. They made just a
Right.
crazy amount of them. And there's a company now that has started making them again, and they're selling them, both individually and in bulk, as a way to, as a nice little corporate gift or something like that. But I just like, what was interesting is that, like, guys were kind of showing them off as like challenge. I wonder if there's something that, maybe we need to do something like that for this Enlightenment values kind of thing.
Sure. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Give that some thought.
All right.
Yeah. All right. So, again, we want to know what you think. Unfortunately, we weren't able to, show up live for most people who would, but normally, if you want to attend the live show, we normally will, go live, usually around 8:00, Central Time on Sunday nights. Sometimes it's give or take a few minutes just because we're getting our technical, act together. And we'd love to have you. We'd love to have you comment. We usually are pretty, interactive with the comments. Otherwise, we want to know what you think. So drop us a line at, xoriente@gmail.com. Leave a comment on our Facebook page. Comment on the blog at, xoriente.com. This is a discussion. This is a dialogue, and it's important that you guys, especially you guys in Arkansas, right? We want to hear from you too. Be anonymous if you want to. We don't, we're all good with that. But we're all here trying to make Masonry a better thing, a better institution. So, with that, and I want to also acknowledge our, executive producers. Thank you so much, for what you do, for your support. It makes things like this possible. And we're going to be doing some really cool things this year. My hope and trust is that, these things are going to happen. And a lot of it's going to be around, Masonic education. If you'd like to be, an executive producer, you can go to our Patreon page. It's patreon.com/X-Oriente, and make a pledge. And everybody who does, gets a welcome kit, but you also get, I have, some custom, special content that's only available for producers. The first thing that's up there is, the speech that I gave at the, Masonic Society, banquet dinner, which was a very interesting evening, and that's up there for the executive producers. Anything else? Any shameless plugs or?
No, can't think any off the top of my head right now.
Cool.
I think we're
So
good to go.
next week, Jason's, off to the old country. He'll be, drinking beer and
Playing with wooden shoes.
playing with wooden shoes and strolling through the red light district. Maybe not.
Probably not.
And he'll be back in 2 weeks. In the meantime, we'll probably be back, next week. I'm going to see if we can line up some guests to continue the discussion.
Sounds good.
Until then, everybody take care. Fiat Vox.
Fiat Fox. Good night, everybody. Thank you.